On December the 6th, 1912, a Chicago newspaper headline read, "Christmas Ship, lost on the lake with 17 on board." This headline describes what turned out to be one of the most bizarre, or perhaps the only, Christmas tree shipwreck of all time. So today, for our special Christmas episode, we will discover the story of Chicago's mysterious Christmas tree shipwreck. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's start on Lake Michigan at its peak in 1868, when more than 1,800 sailing vessels traversed the lake with shipments of commodities and freight. The dominant sailing-powered ships on Lake Michigan was the sturdy schooner, built to haul heavy loads in and out of shallow harbors with its principal cargo, lumber, feeding the high demand for building materials in growing urban areas such as Chicago and Milwaukee. However, by 1912, these ships had an onshore future. You see, lake carriers had long since faced fierce competition from the railroads. Railroads delivered their cargo during the winter months, when the lake was impassable due to ice and storms. Lumber shipments via schooners also reduced in numbers with the depletion of Lake Michigan's shoreline forests, whereas the railroads had already reached inland to haul new sources of timber. Nonetheless, an ample supply of pine trees were still available for the fall harvest, and lake shipment for Christmas tree season was often optimal. In 1868, the Rouse Simmons was launched from Milwaukee's shipyard. The ship was built by the firm Allen McCollin & Company, one of Milwaukee's prominent shipbuilding firms. Sleek and sturdy, the 123-foot Rouse Simmons was licensed and enrolled on August the 27th, 1868, at the port of Milwaukee. The vessel's managing owner was Royal B. Townsley of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and its first master was Alfred Ackerman. The Rouse Simmons was named after a well-known Kenoshan merchant of the same name as brothers Zalman Simmons, who swiftly gained fame for his family's mattress company. In the early 1870s, the Rouse Simmons joined the sizable shipping fleet of the wealthy lumber magnate Charles H. Hackley of Michigan. Hackley's lumber operations stretched to all corners of Lake Michigan's coastline, and the Rouse Simmons was its workhorse, hauling loads of lumber for Hackley's fleet from company mills to the various markets around the Great Lakes for roughly 20 years. A survey of entrances and clearances from the records of the U.S. Customs Service for the port of Grand Haven, Michigan, for August of 1883 shows that the ship was making almost weekly runs from Grand Haven, most likely with loads of lumber, to the port of Chicago. And naturally, for the magical Christmas season, it would haul Christmas trees as well, but more on that later. By the late 19th and early 20th century, the popular German tradition of decorating an evergreen tree in the home was widely practiced, and demand for Christmas trees was great. It was not uncommon for a handful of lake schooners to make late-season runs from northern Michigan and Wisconsin before the worst storms and ice made the lake travel too hazardous. Despite the risk, the payoff was major when they'd get back to Chicago markets fully loaded with thousands of Christmas trees. Estimates of the number of Christmas schooners varied, but perhaps up to 24 vessels in a given season delivered evergreens to markets in the Great Lakes. Most vessels, including the Rouse Simmons, sold trees directly from their berths along the Chicago River's Clark Street docks in Chicago. Electric lights were strung from the schooner's bow to the stern, and customers were invited to board the ship and choose their tree. In addition to selling Christmas trees, many boat operators made and sold wreaths, garlands, and holiday decorations. And although the Christmas spirit was generally well and alive in Chicago, the captain of the Rouse Simmons really took the jolliness to the next level, which is perhaps where the story starts to head off its rails a bit. The captains of the Rouse Simmons were Herman Schuemann and Oscar Nelson. In 1910, Herman Schuemann purchased a partial interest in the Rouse Simmons. By 1912, his financial interest in the ship amounted to 1/8, while Captain Charles Nelson of Chicago owned another 1/8 share, and businessman Mans J. Boner of St. James, Michigan, held a commanding 3/4 interest in the vessel. The 1870 census revealed that Wisconsin native Schuemann was born in 1865 into the middle of a growing family of 6 children in the predominantly German community of present-day Algoma on the shores of Lake Michigan. His eldest brother, August, born 1853, was the first to make his living on the lake. Herman, however, soon followed in his brother's footsteps. By the early 1890s, Schuemann lived in Chicago, and his career as a local merchant and lake captain was well established. On April the 9th, 1891, he married German-born Barbara Schindel. The 1900 federal census indicates that Barbara and Herman Schuemann had 3 daughters during the 1890s. Elsie, born in January of 1892, and in October 1898, twins Hazel and Pearl. Barbara Schuemann and her 3 daughters helped make and sell wreaths and garlands as a part of the family holiday trade. In 1912, Schuemann was a veteran schooner master who had hauled Christmas trees to Chicago for almost 3 decades. At some stage of Herman Schumann's long career as a late-season tree captain, he was given the title of Captain Santa. The affectionate nickname was bestowed by the Chicago local newspapers and by the city's grateful residents. Schumann's profits from selling Christmas trees had never made the family wealthy, but his reputation for generosity was well established, and he delighted in presenting trees to many of the city's needy residents. Schuemann enjoyed the notoriety and proudly kept newspaper clippings about his role as Captain Santa in an oilskin wallet. Remember this point, it's going to be important later. Much less is known about Oscar Nelson. However, newspaper reports characterized him as fearless, so navigating Lake Michigan fall storms in the most rudimentary of vessels stowing thousands of Christmas trees would have certainly suited him. While Schuemann was in his prime as a lake captain, the same could not be said for the Rouse Simmons. The once sleek sailing vessel was now 44 years old and long past its prime. Time, the elements, and hundreds of heavy loads of lumber had taken their toll on the vessel's physical condition. And let's just say that it wasn't exactly bound for a Christmas miracle. On Friday, November the 22nd, 1912, the Rouse Simmons, heavily laden with between 3,000 and 5,000 Christmas trees filling its cargo hold and covering its deck, left from Thompson's Pier at Manistee, Michigan for a scheduled 42-hour journey back to Chicago. Some eyewitnesses to the Rouse Simmons' departure claimed the ship looked like a floating forest. The 17 aboard included captains and business partners, Herman Schuemann and Oscar Nelson. Nelson's wife was the lone woman on board. A first mate and 13 sailors were the other crew members. Although the weather was fine when the Rouse Simmons departed, its departure coincided with the beginning of a tremendous winter storm on the lake. A report soon reached Chicago of a sighting of a 3-mast schooner off the coast between Kewaunee and Two Rivers, Wisconsin, flying signals of distress. On November the 28th, Thanksgiving Day, 1912, the concerned relatives of those on board began to search for any trace of their loved ones. The newspapers reported that a life-saving crew was sent from Kewaunee attempting to reach the vessel during the daylight, but failed. Night fell while the struggle was ongoing. At dawn, lifesavers, wallowing through the heavy swells that the storm had left in its wake, reached the place where the stricken Christmas tree ship had last been seen. No signs of sail were in sight. Life-saving station logs testify that at 2:50 p.m. on Saturday, November the 23rd, 1912, a Wisconsin surfman alerted the station keeper, Captain Nelson Crate, that a ship was sighted headed south, flying its flag at half-mast, a universal sign of distress. He further remarked, "I immediately took the glasses and made out that there was a distress signal. The ship was between 5 and 6 miles ESE and blowing a gale from the northwest. Crate attempted to locate a gas tugboat to assist the schooner, but the vessel had left earlier in the day. After a few minutes, the life-saving crew lost sight of the ship. At 3:10 p.m., Crate telephoned station keeper Captain George E. Sogg at Two Rivers that a schooner was headed south, flying its flag at half-mast. Sogg immediately ordered the Two Rivers surfmen to launch the station's powerboat. The boat reached the schooner's approximate position shortly thereafter, but darkness, heavy snow, and mist obscured any trace of the ship and its crew. The ship had simply vanished. However, gossip circulated about a sole survivor. Regional newspapers began to report stories from the only crew member who escaped, Hoganson. Hoganson charged that the schooner was overloaded and carried no lifeboats. The man parted ways with Captain Nelson after being ordered to pile up a load of sapling trees on deck after the cargo hold had been filled to capacity with the larger trees. Nelson told Hoganson that he would not be paid unless he returned with the ship. Hoganson had enough money for a train fare back to Chicago and thus escaped whatever fate had become of his fellow crew members. After 2 weeks, news came that hatches of the ship and large quantities of Christmas trees had been washed ashore near Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Nonetheless, seamen still had hope that with so few craft on the lake this late in the season, the Christmas tree ship might simply be adrift for weeks. This prompted a telegraph from the treasurer of the Chicago Seamen's Union to Captain Barry of the United States revenue cutter Tuscarora to steam out into the lake immediately to reach the Rouse Simmons. The Tuscarora sailed upon receiving the message to retrace the supposed course of the Rouse Simmons. The first wireless message received from the Tuscarora read, "Lake is foggy. No sign of Rouse Simmons. Captain Barry." By December the 7th, the tone of the newspaper articles had decidedly shifted to abandon hope, as numerous Christmas trees and bits of unmarked wreckage drift onto the shores of Michigan. The Chicago Tribune reports that the fate of Chicago's Christmas tree ship has been settled definitively in the eyes of all lake sailors. Hundreds of tangled Christmas trees and evergreen wreaths were found scattered along the beaches for miles, and most of the wreckage was piled onto the shore within 20 miles of the point where the Rouse Simmons was last sighted. Captains Schuenemann and Nelson were seasoned veterans of Lake Michigan, having made many similar voyages over the years on the vessel they knew well. The Rouse Simmons had proven itself capable of withstanding the worst of fall storms. But some believe that Captain Nelson's fearless decision to overload the ship would have given the ship little chance of staying afloat in bad weather. Lake schooners, of course, were not equipped with any kind of wireless transmitter to send dots and dashes for help, and reports differ as to whether or not the Rouse Simmons had a lifeboat. Some reports say that the schooner had one lifeboat, which would have been woefully inadequate for more than a few of the crewmen, but the general consensus is that there was no lifeboat at all. The reason this Christmas ship story remains relevant throughout history is what happened after the disaster. In the few weeks leading up to Christmas of 1912, Chicago's Inter-Ocean newspaper and other businesses and organizations reached out to the family. Although Herman's wife Barbara was ill with grief, the eldest daughter Elsie showed incredible strength and selflessness to keep the events from overtaking her family as well as the other suffering families. The Inter-Ocean newspaper solicited donations for the families and reported as follows on Tuesday, December the 10th. In a dingy little room at South Water and Clark Street, where a window overlooks the Chicago River, there sat a beautiful, golden-haired, sad-eyed girl. She was weaving Christmas garlands. Now and then her fingers would halt their work, and glance of her sad, blue eyes would look towards Lake Michigan, where her father perished, and tears would fall upon the garland in her lap. The girl is Elsie Schuenemann, the daughter of Herman Schuenemann, skipper of the Rouse Simmons, the lost Christmas ship which went down with all hands. The garlands she weaves are from the wreckage of the cargo of the Rouse Simmons, picked up along the shore of Wisconsin and shipped to Chicago. They will be sold by the girl, who finds herself at the head of the family, now destitute. Her mother, prostrated by grief, is ill. There are 2 younger sisters. In response to an appeal from the sailors, shippers, and merchants from whom Captain Schuenemann worked, and friends, the Inter-Ocean starts a relief fund for the family. Every dollar the family possessed was represented in the schooner, Rouse Simmons, and its stock of Christmas trees and greens. W.C. Holmes of W.C. Holmes Shipping Company, for whom Captain Schuenemann commanded a ship for years, has put the schooner Anita at the disposal of Mrs. Schuenemann and her friends. It will be moored today at the south side of the Clark Street Bridge, where the Rouse Simmons has stood every Christmas season for years, laden with Christmas trees and decorations for sale. On the Oneida will be placed the trees picked up from the Rouse Simmons wreckage. To this will be added a carload of greens, which the captain shipped from Michigan woods by rail. When the news of this plan spread amongst sailors on the waterfront, scores of seamen, friends of Captain Schuenemann, called Miss Elsie and offered their services on the craft. Her courage was praised by everyone. It was even suggested that the Seamen's Union charter a boat every year and send north for trees to be disposed of and the proceeds given to the stricken family. Strangely, these charity preparations were done in privacy, as Mrs. Schuenemann was in such a condition that physicians issued an order of ignorance. The grief made her hysterical, and on account of that, it was decided she best not know the actual fate her husband had faced on Lake Michigan. So in her flat at 1628 North Clark Street, she gathered her two younger children around and told them not to cry. She told them that her father is safe, to which Elsie recalled, "Keeping everything from her mother makes it harder to bear. But our friends have been good to us. I don't know what I would have done without them. Everything we had was tied up in the schooner. And with father gone, not only our store, but the source of providing more was taken away. One never knows what they can do until they have to. I'm going to make an attempt to carry our father's Christmas tree business." And so it was. Following the tragedy, Barbara and her daughters continued the family's Christmas tree business. Newspaper accounts suggest that they used schooners for several more years to bring trees to Chicago. Later, the women brought the evergreen trees to Chicago by train and then sold them from the deck of a docked schooner. After Barbara's death in 1933, the daughters sold trees from the family lot for a few more years. Many believe that the loss of the Rouse Simmons, however, signaled the beginning of the end for schooners hauling loads of evergreens to Chicago. By 1920, the practice of bringing trees to Chicago via schooners had ceased. Just a few years later, the majority of the once proud schooners lay leaking and decaying, moored in their berths around the lake. Astonishingly, the lake continued to give up clues long after the vessel's loss. In 1924, some fishermen in Wisconsin hauled in their nets and discovered a wallet wrapped in a waterproof oilskin. Inside were the pristine contents that identified its owner as Herman Schuenemann, the captain of the Rouse Simmons. The wallet was returned to the family. Then, on a drizzly, overcast day in late October 1971, Milwaukee scuba diver Gordon Kent Bell Richard was surveying with sonar at the bottom of Lake Michigan's west coastal waters just off of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Bell Richard was searching for the Vernon, a 177-foot, 700-ton steamer that had sunk with only one survivor in a storm in October 1887. Local fishermen described an area to Bell Richard where their nets had snagged on previous occasions as a potential site for his search. His sonar made a promising contact, and he descended to what appeared to be a well-preserved shipwreck resting in an upright position in 172 feet of water. Upon reaching the wreck, his light malfunctioned, leaving him in blanketed, murky darkness. Without light, he surveyed the wreckage by feeling along its hull. Bell Richard quickly realized that he had not discovered the large, propeller-driven Vernon, but the wreckage of the elusive Rouse Simmons. Indeed, this is not a happy Christmas story, but it's insane to consider that the delivery of Christmas trees to Chicago once required a journey of epic proportions. It's also a beautiful example of camaraderie to support a widow and her daughters. And beyond that, it's just downright bizarre. Could you imagine that for the Christmas of 1912, there were people who bought Christmas trees that drifted back to shore from a sunken ship? And this history is not as far removed as you might expect. The grandfather of the man who wrote this episode worked in a warehouse less than a mile from the Clark Street dock during this period. And who knows, we might even speculate that the writer's ancestor may have seen this ship with his own eyes at some point. So Chicagoans, keep your story alive by sharing this video with everyone for the holiday and subscribe to It's History. This is Ryan Sokash, signing off.